Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Russell Daniels, and I am the Digital Communications Director at Open Primaries. I want to welcome everyone to today's call, Gen Z and the Rejection of Party Politics. Can young people really break through and create new modes of participation? I have a few quick announcements before I introduce today's host. The first announcement, we are hosting a Q&A at the end of the call. So if you have questions, please put your name and state in the chat along with a one-sentence description of your question. The host will call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask away. Two, again, please be sure you're muted. There's with this many people on the call, we just want to make things clear. And then finally, I'd also like to announce that this is not only the kickoff for Students for Open Primaries, but also a kickoff for the Open Primaries Education Fund's 2021 initiative to raise $100,000 for Students for Open Primaries and other youth initiatives over the course of the year. Now, obviously, this is a big undertaking that will require a lot of support. So this is not just a quick fundraising pitch, but obviously, I'm also encouraging you to please donate to the Open Primaries Education Fund. I will share the link in the chat. It's tax deductible and every dollar raised will go directly towards this initiative. But if we're going to do this and achieve this, and we're gonna have to be crafty, we're gonna have to be creative. And so I am forming a fundraising committee specifically for this initiative. And I want anyone interested on this call to join that committee. Contact me. Let's start a conversation. You don't have to be a fundraising whiz, but I'm looking for people who are inspired after this call and are willing to put in a little time and help us to connect to more donors and more supporters across the country. I'll add my email address to the chat, which is rdaniels@openprimaries.org. Just please send a message and we'll get that conversation going. And I'll do a quick reminder at the end of the call about that. With that, I'm so excited to introduce today's host, Diane Robinson. She has 2 decades of experience working as a teacher, nonprofit leader, educational consultant, and filmmaker. She has launched and scaled high-performing organizations like Teach for America, the KIPP Foundation, Teach for All, and Global Nomads Group. She is directing a documentary featuring Dariel and Elena on this call called The Young Vote, which follows young organizers around the country as they work to get fellow youth to vote, navigate the challenges in our current political system, and illuminate why the young vote matters. We're so excited to have her hosting. And with that, I will turn it over to Diane. Diane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for inviting me. It's so lovely to be here and to see so many people who are interested in this conversation. As Russell shared, the bulk of my career has been spent in education, and I made the transition just before COVID to filmmaking. And the first topic that I wanted to cover is in our film called The Young Vote. So this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I think this topic of how do young people really break through when it comes to party politics is something that we spent a lot of time thinking about it in the film. So I'm really excited for the discussion today. So welcome everybody. And I'm just gonna start out by doing a quick introduction on our panelists. And then I'm gonna ask a few questions before probably around 5:35 or so. We will ask you to, ask your questions of the panelists. So take any notes that you'd like as we're going in this first part. But I'm looking forward to this discussion. And so just to give you a sense of who all we have with us today, Elena Ashburn is the co-founder of Students for Open Primaries. She is a high school junior who also co-founded Bloom, a website for military kids by military kids. Additionally, she was a founding fellow of Civics Unplugged, and she remains active in the Civics 2030 community in her free time. In her free time, she also hosts Civics Unplugged's podcast, Mission Control 2030, the voice of Civics Unplugged. Dariel is the co-founder of Students for Open Primaries, and along with Elena, he's also in the film The Young Vote, and he's a leader in Florida's Let All Voters Vote top 2 open primary campaign. He serves on the steering committee of Civics 2030 campaign for Civics Unplugged, and he's also their social media coordinator. Gary Sheng is the co-founder and COO of Civics Unplugged, a global community of young leaders working together to strengthen democracy, also an organization we profile in the film. While they're only in year 2 of a decade-long journey, CU has already partnered with and found supporters like Andrew Yang, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and National Geographic. And they're committed to doing whatever it takes to help Gen Zers create lasting change. And last but not least, Julia Hemsworth is currently an administrative assistant, social media coordinator, and youth outreach coordinator at independentvoting.org. She studied illustration at FIT and has contributed her design skills to multiple projects with independent voting, including designing Eyes On 2020 campaign and assisting on their reports, and also a portrait of President Jackie Salad. So just now that you all have a sense of who all is with us, I'm going to start out just by asking a very sort of basic question, which is something I find really interesting following young people in the film that we did this past year. But how did you get involved? Like, what made you get involved? One sentence or less in civic activism. Let's start with Julia.
Hi. I've been an independent voter since I was old enough to vote. And basically, I would say it was my experience in the 2016 election, which was the first election I was old enough to vote in, a mix of being a Bernie supporter and watching the Democratic Party kind of force their own agenda on that whole situation, and leaving with kind of a bad taste in my mouth after that whole situation. I kind of came out of it thinking there has to be something more I can do for independent voters. So after I graduated college, I found independent voting in 2019, and I've been on the team ever since.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Julia. And Gary, what about you? What got you involved in this work?
Similarly, 2016 showed me how little I knew about how the world worked. I was probably unfortunately surprised by how fragile our democracy was. And it took me a while to actually understand that it was the system itself that needed to be reformed. It wasn't that we can just hope for one candidate or one of the major parties. Both parties are kind of colluding sort of to prevent independent thought, right, from actually being able to be translated into political power. And I think one of the greatest reflections of that is the Florida, almost like the campaign against Dariel and Elena and Open Primaries campaign to let all voters vote. So I just continue to be invigorated by this whole thing.
Thank you, Gary. And Elena, you're not quite a voting age yet, at least currently. But so what got you involved? Like, why is being civically engaged important to you?
Well, you're right. I'm only 17, so I'm not yet able to vote. But I think it definitely I come from a military family. As Diane, you mentioned earlier, this idea of service has always been very important to me and my family. And so it was sort of natural that I would want to get involved in community and civic service to our larger democracy and our larger country. Specifically, an event that really stood out to me as starting my journey on civic activism and just activism in general was the Parkland shooting in 2018. That really was a reckoning for so many kids, especially, and it definitely started me on the path of advocacy.
Thank you, Elena. And last but not least, Dariel, what do you think got you on this path, Dariel?
I've always had an eagerness to lead and have leadership qualities. And I think it was as I started shifting into my freshman year or around my freshman to sophomore year when I started realizing that what happens in government also affects us, whether it be a cut to local teacher salaries or a major cut to how we elect our representatives. Everything from the bottom to the top affected us and our futures, especially our future careers.
Yes. And when you say your freshman year, you mean in high school, correct?
High school. Yes.
Yes.
High school.
All right. So I'm going to start out with a question for you, Julia. So you're focused on organizing young independent voters, like you said, and the polls show that 50 to 60% of young people today don't want to join a political party, right? But partisan politics is still the dominant game. So how do you approach organizing young independents? And what are some of the challenges that you run into, just given the polarization that exists right now in our country?
Yeah, so at Independent Voting, we're putting together a national initiative to connect and empower young independent voters. The way that we have started going about it, it's a big game of, by the numbers, we know that these young independents exist. They're out there. So our goal is finding them and bringing them all together, connecting them so that they know they're not alone, and educating them on the movement and what's going on. The common experience to me seems to be that just declaring yourself an outsider causes friction and pokes holes in the system. I remember when I was younger, I thought I'll be an independent and I'll get used to the system before I decide to pick a side. That led me into discovering what closed primaries were and why I couldn't participate in them, and how that affected in New York, which is primarily dominated by the Democratic Party, how that affected the general election and how much of that was already decided before I even had a chance to vote. So you're seeing this group of people come about who all have this experience, but don't know that there's so many other people out there like them. And it's interesting to bring these people together and find out they don't know how much weight it holds declaring themselves an independent voter, how big the trend is. And they're not always aware of the efforts going on in their state or across the country where people like them have come together to fight voter suppression efforts and fight laws that don't reflect having everyone have an equal right to vote. I think one of the challenges for me is getting hung up on the people who don't want to get involved. I find it frustrating when people talk to me and they voice their frustrations with the two-party system, how they wish they could leave the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but don't want to make that step, don't want to get involved, don't want to leave. But I keep telling myself, you can't force people to change their minds, and you can't waste energy fretting over the things that you don't have. You have to work with what you've got, because that's really all you can do. It's the same with organizing on limited resources. You have to work with what you've got. If you have a small team, you have a small team, but that's what you got and that's what you can work with, and you do with that what you can.
Yeah. So Julia, to that point of people who are afraid to take the leap, right, to leave the party, oftentimes, what I hear too is this point of, well, there's a closed primary in your state, but the choices, especially in this last general election, were pretty clear, right? Well, for many people it was. So what do you say to those people who they push back on this movement for independent voters, and they say, look, just choose a party, right? Just pick one. You don't have to sit this one out. Just sign up. Like here in Florida, we still don't have open primaries, but again, if you want to vote, you can choose a party, right? So the choice is still there for that two-party system. And I guess I'm just curious, what do you say to those people who push back and say, you know what, you can make a choice?
So what's interesting to me about this is I find when people talk about this, it's usually not about the closed primaries themselves. It's like people don't entirely understand the voter suppression aspects of closed primaries, the impact that the primaries have on the general election, the history of closed primaries. It's so much more, like you're saying, it's so much more about why aren't you on a team? And I find that comes from the issues that these people care about. The parties like to take ownership of this issue or that issue, or this is the right answer, or that's the right answer. And they often end up using those issues to kind of make enemies out of each other, reducing candidates and elections into just red squares versus blue squares. I find that for people of my generation, people my age, that doesn't really work for us, because we end up wanting to vote for the issues, but not people just because they're connected to the party. So often what I end up saying to people is that I sympathize, I know there's issues that need to be addressed, but I don't know if effective, long-standing solutions are possible in a system that takes advantage of these issues for essentially marketing purposes. And, you know, parties, the longer that issue is drawn out, the longer the party can use it as their platform. So often I discuss my experience as an independent, and I try to impart as much information on them as they're willing to take, including things like how I pay taxes into a primary system I can't participate in. Whether or not they hold on to what I'm saying is, you know, dependent on the person. But if they ask me the question, I'm going to answer them honestly. So that's my experience.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And Dariel, maybe you can even build on that same question, but I wanted to start by asking you, Dariel, like, well, first, congratulations to you and Elena for launching Students for Open Primaries. It's very exciting. And, you know, you originally founded the organization having never run a political campaign before to support the effort to enact this top 2 primary system here in Florida. I guess my big question to you is, you know, what were you all trying to accomplish? And what did you learn from that experience that motivated you to want to start this broader national group?
You definitely have it right that I had no experience before Students for Open Primaries in Florida. One thing I learned from the experience about running top 2 open primaries in Florida in November was state politics is like a ball game with no rules. And it's primarily because independents aren't allowed to pick who gets involved in state politics, as in who is on their general ballot. Elena and I both saw foul balls thrown at us by the political parties that made us seriously reconsider how we viewed the parties. And the experience overall grew me closer to the open primaries effort, because I now believe that we cannot make any meaningful change in how our representative democracy works without letting all voters vote, which is why I, along with Elena, chose to take this fight nationally. It's not a fight just for now, it's a fight for our future, how we will be able to make ourselves heard when we become voting adults.
Yeah. And to this question, Dariel, of why choose, you know what I mean? Like, why, so say you're going to be voting for the first time, right? In 2022, like, what will you do, you know, when in a state where we don't have an open primary? Will you wait until the general? Like, what do you do? And what's the advice you give to those young people who are in states that still have closed primaries that leave so many of your generation out?
Right now with the system, it's very limited as to what you can do as an independent voter. So my advice, being an independent in Florida, would be to stick to your moral values. Don't do a tap dance around with the parties in your registration. Vote in the nonpartisan primaries that you are allowed to vote in, your local elections, and then try and support the candidates in the political party that you want on the general election ballot and try to get them to win in those primary elections. Because right now you're very limited with your options about how you can get onto the general election ballot with closed primaries. And that's how I intend on voting and making sure that the people I want on the general election ballot have the best chance of getting on the general election ballot.
That's great. So Gary, for you, you've said that the younger generation of Americans today are disproportionately focused on civic engagement, which I completely believe in. But I think the dominant narrative that I at least heard when I started making my film was young people don't vote, right? And they don't turn out in high numbers the way that, say, folks above 65 or even 55 do. So how do you like, what are you seeing that makes you so optimistic, right? When the narrative has been young people don't show up, they post on social media, they protest, but they don't vote.
Well, I actually think that the disconnect between their civic identity and their voting behavior is actually deeply indicative of how broken our electoral system is, right? Because they don't actually feel like they have a way to channel their civic aspirations into the ballot, because they know that, just judging from their entire lives, but also hearing, just studying history, they've just seen that our political system does not put the best people forward, and so they're finding other ways to try to change the world. I know that younger millennials, such as myself, a lot of them are doing activism inside the workplace because they think that like more general politics is not that useful, right? So just like a few years ago, there was a Google walkout to protest for gender discrimination and other things that people didn't feel like were going well inside Google, right? So that sort of those civic values, that civic identity, it's being channeled somewhere, but unfortunately, unless there's like a path forward to channel it productively into the political system, we're going to keep seeing these disparities. So this is why these sorts of calls are really heartening for me, because it shows that there's interest in creating that pathway.
All right. And Gary, just sort of sticking a little bit with Civics Unplugged, I'm wondering if you could just like really quickly summarize what you all do and what you are trying to cultivate in terms of this civic engagement muscle. And is it through the schools or not through the schools? And what role do you think the schools should play in this?
So we love schools, at least in the sense that, a lot of I don't know, Dariel is a great example. His former social studies teacher recommended Civics Unplugged to him. So we're happy to work with any sort of administrator, teacher that really believes in their students. What we do is we do a bunch of things. We illuminate that the dysfunction of our political system, so that it becomes part of young people's civic aspirations to do something about it. And then we're trying to do everything that we can to give young people everything that they might need to be able to engage in projects such as political reform, such as Students for Open Primaries. So that's mentorship, peer community, funding, and then actually connecting them to amazing people like the folks at Open Primaries, right? Because otherwise, doing this on your own is like basically impossible, right? Even, so hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. I guess one thing I was still wondering though, Gary, is in terms of when you think of Dariel's teacher, having been a teacher, right? I can speak to a lot of teachers right now are in a culture where our school system really heavily focuses on STEM, for instance, math, science, reading, and so much of it is test driven in our culture. And civics tends to fall to the side, right? And I think Florida is actually one of the only states that requires civics throughout the year. So I guess I'm wondering about, what you think might need to happen in our school systems and in our states in order to like start to cultivate more of this muscle. Because it's ideal world, if we're talking about system change of all of this, schools have to play some role.
Yeah, no question about that. And we're lucky to be in the fall to be piloting in-person sort of version of Civics Unplugged in a few different like forward-thinking schools. The general issue with trying to get reform-oriented civic education or participatory education is that if you're someone allocating budget for civic education, you probably wouldn't want to empower teachers to teach education that might disempower your party. Right? So our independence at Civics Unplugged is actually why we're able to be genuinely enlightening for young people and empowering. So I guess the jury's still out of whether, like, how exactly we can make civic education as useful as it needs to be inside the classroom. But, you know, while we figure that out, we're actively, you know, scaling our digital first program that, you know, covers kids in every state.
Yeah, that's great to know. So I have one final question for Elena, and if you all have questions, please start putting them in the chat. We're gonna switch to a Q&A in about 5 minutes or so. But Elena, on this issue of open primaries, you know, that resonates so strongly with students and young people your age and also millennials. I've heard some cynical statements about how young voters only care about hot topics and issues, things that make a splash on Instagram. How do you know young people will actually turn out in primaries if they are opened up?
Well, first off, I think you said part of the answer yourself earlier when you said about half of these younger generations of voters tend to be politically independent because they don't want to attach themselves to a party. And I think that we're definitely seeing that now with the hyper polarization that's going on within our government. We have like people very much so on the right end of the spectrum and people very much so on the left end of the spectrum. And people don't always want to attach themselves to those. And I think that if we open up the primaries, we are allowing these younger generations who may not want to be attached to these sort of increasingly polarized and extreme views, they can now vote and have their opinions heard at the ballot box. As for how do I know that people will actually turn out? It's because I know that, and this past election year was a great example, when we are ready to see change, and I think that 2020, like I said, was the perfect example of that. We show up. Young voter turnout rates in the 2020 election crushed all previous records. So when we're empowered and opened up and allowed to vote, which Students for Open Primaries hopes to help do, we show up and we really make a difference.
Well, that's very true. And I think someone put the data in the chat that, you know, sort of my theory going into making this film was that you all would turn out in higher numbers in 2020 and also actually in January. You know, my theory and my best guess is that if we can keep connecting empowering young people and, you know, opening up more primaries, I think we are going to see the young vote grow. So we're going to switch now a bit to Q&A. Russell's been helping me with the Q&A, that the questions you've been putting in the chat. So I'm going to call you all and I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself and just say where you are and ask your question. And if it's directed, if you have a specific person on the panel you'd like to address, please do, or I can help direct the question. So let's start with Caitlin Lacasse. I hope I'm saying your name right with the first question, and she's in Maine.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. My question is for how do those of us who might be a little older connect with student organizations like yourselves, especially where we, you know, in Maine, we're working on an effort for semi-open primaries and would love to connect with other student organizations who are interested in this effort. There's obviously a really good, there could be a really good partnership there. So just wondering how you would suggest we go about doing that.
And that's a general question to everyone, Caitlin. So Elena?
I can hop on that one. So first off, you know, identifying different student organizations and reaching out to them personally. I know as someone who's led student-led organizations, we are always so willing to work with other people because that not only helps us and helps you, but it also gives us more experience. Additionally, like reaching out to the student population in general is really, really helpful. I recommend social media, blasting as much as you can on social media, because that's where the teenagers are these days. That's where the students are these days. I know it's sort of like a stereotype of our generation, but it's kind of true. Definitely making digital first like content, like social media, videos, maybe a website, that could be really helpful. And then also what Dariel and I did specifically when we were working on the Students for Open Primaries campaign in Florida in support of the Open Primaries initiative is we reached out to colleges and high schools and different larger organizations such as like student government, things like that, that have a large pool of students that are already very civically engaged or very active in their communities that might want to contribute.
Great, thanks, Elena. So Lily Hart in DC, I see you are a college student and you have a question.
Yeah, so my question is that I've had a lot of trouble in the past trying to vote in primaries because of absentee ballots and whatnot. I vote in New York State, and it's supposed to be easier for people from New York State, but it's not. So I was just wondering if you guys were going to be focusing on this dilemma that I know a lot of college students face, especially people in, let's say, like Missouri, I think it's Missouri, where you have to get like an official to sign your absentee ballot so that you can return it and be able to vote. Is this something you guys are going to focus on? Yeah, that's just my question.
So that's actually works really well because we have, we're planning on launching sort of a student ambassador program where we hope to have at least one student ambassador for Students for Open Primaries in each closed primary state. You know, it would be great if we had all 50 states as well. And those student ambassadors are going to be in charge of not only working on open primaries reforms and activating the youth base around them, but then they can also serve as information banks, and they can help with problems like that, especially when it comes to voting in closed primary systems. So yes, through like the larger student ambassador organization that we're like working on, you can find the student ambassador for your specific state once we get that part set up to help you.
Great.
Could
Julie,
I
want to add something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, off of that, I think it's also these youth-based organizations, these student-run organizations are trying to reflect the needs and the wants of us young voters. So getting involved in these organizations and letting them know, hey, this is an issue that I think relates to this or is really important to us and should be addressed. It's always worth getting involved and putting your voice out there and letting people know, because we want to reflect the issues that affect you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Julia. I mean, one of the topics we actually explore in our film is the idea of mobile voting and making that also an option, especially given this younger generation and your familiarity with technology. But it's really interesting that you asked that question, Lily, because I think it's also reflecting, I think, very much a generational divide between how you're supposed to vote, right? Like, you know, I have people who are older than me in my family here who refuse to do mail-in voting. They have to go to the polls. And then there are those who are, you know, they'll do mail-in voting. But I do wonder, you know, when we're thinking about adapting a system so that it's really meeting the needs of the voters, right? If there aren't more ways for us to be looking at how do we make voting accessible and easier for everybody. So I think you ask a really good question, Lily. Someone asked me the question of our film. We're still in editing right now, but follow us at Yard Girl Productions on Instagram. We're hoping to release the film before the midterms because we really want it to be a tool to help inspire more young people to get out there and get civically involved. And then we have another question from William Weber. William, I'm not sure where you're based, but if you're on, if you could unmute and just say hello and tell us your question.
Yes, hi. I am in Portland, Maine. I'm a rabid Democrat, and I think open primaries is really very important, right? As you mentioned, independents are getting more and more frequent, and I think we need to expand the tent. So, you know, we need to push on democracy. So, but my question is if an independent votes in a primary and their candidate does not win, will that turn them off to voting in the general?
It's a great question. Do you all want to take that? Maybe start with Dariel and Julie and then Elena.
Yeah, were you able to repeat the last part of that question?
I think his question was, if you vote for a candidate in the primary, but your candidate doesn't win, is that right, William? Will that turn you off from voting in the general?
Right.
Absolutely not, because when you don't vote, it's a wasted vote, and you're pretty much setting yourself up for failure. There probably will be another candidate, although they may be a little bit worse than the people that you voted in the primaries. They may still be more open to hearing your ideas if they do actually end up getting into office, because they still have to serve their constituency. At least that's how it's supposed to work. And in most states, there are write-in sections in the general election ballot where you can write them in if you feel the need to do it for personal or moral values to vote for that specific candidate and that candidate only. But there's no one person that has a set of values and beliefs, and that's it. There are other candidates having different variations of how strongly they feel about issues. They can possibly help lead them in the right direction. So instead of just not voting, guide them in the right direction and go out and vote for them with that hope in mind.
I would say, framing it this way, you know, there are states where we can't vote in the primaries, and we're hoping that one of the candidates wins in that primary election. And if they don't, we will vote in the general election anyway. So I would say that we're used to having the candidate that we support not win and still voting in the general election. I also think that independent voters tend to be already very, I wouldn't say aggressive. They participate in the general elections in force. And I think you'd see the attitude of elections change too. You know, with open primaries, the elections would be more competitive. The candidates would appeal to more people. They would have to. So I don't think that there would be a situation where that would really turn independent voters off. I think it would actually encourage people to vote, because you might end up having more than one candidate that you agree with.
Yeah, I mean, you always see that after the primaries, you see the candidates pivot, right? Mm. This would stop them from pivoting because they're really selling to the general public.
Right, especially in a top 2, top 4 type of situation where there is a possibility that several candidates from one party could get those slots. They have to appeal to such a wide base of voters, a wide base of their constituency, that it really isn't about pivoting. It's about immediately making those connections, putting yourself out there, and making yourself the most viable candidate in order to get even into the general election. So I think, like Julia was saying, and like you said, absolutely. I also just personally think that I'm actually taking my mandatory civics course right now because I live in Florida, and that's the mandatory part of our education. And we had to watch a TED Talk about voting, and he said that not voting is voting for everything you stand against, which is why I personally believe that you should always vote if you are able to. And why I think that so many independents are going to vote is because we are shut out of so many elections. We know that when we can vote, it is so important, because when we don't vote, we're voting for the system that shut us out of those primaries in the first place.
Yeah.
I also want to add one more point to this, because I did see someone in the chat mention ranked choice voting. Right now, a lot of people don't actually vote for the person that they want to vote for because of the spoiler effect. They're afraid that voting for the person that they do want to vote for is going to take away from the person who might defeat the person they don't want to vote for. With ranked choice voting worked into the open primary system, you would be able to distribute your vote, rank in an order the candidates that you like, and would lead people to be more likely to vote for someone they actually agree with, as opposed to just voting for someone because they're afraid the opposition would win.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's just so interesting. Someone brought up this point around polarization and how we currently have a system that forces the parties to just go to the very extremes, right? And it does make you wonder, if you have this growing base of independents, what does that do to our political system and the dialogue? It clearly changes it. So let's go to Amanda in Texas. Amanda, you have a question for us. She's still there. We may have lost Amanda. We'll come back. Zach in Colorado, you had a question. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Hi, Zach.
Hey, everybody. How do you make political reform or any topic like this appealing to the younger generation? Everyone on this call is probably a super plugged in political junkie. How do you, and I can say that because I've worked in this space for several years, how do you sell this to Gen Z and people who, like, as Gary said, aren't engaged in the political process in traditional ways, but to pass anything like this, you do have to engage in the political process in more traditional ways?
It's a great question. Dariel, I mean, I'm curious, Dariel and Gary, what you might be thinking about this.
His name was Zach, right? I'm sorry, I just zoned out for a second.
Well, you got engaged in the political process.
Yeah, I got engaged in the political process. I'm sorry, I just forgot what he asked. It was.
Well, his question is, I mean, it's a very good question, right? Because there's some people, we even encountered a few of them when we were filming, who are like, I don't like politics. I don't want to get involved in politics. I like to stay neutral, right? Or I'm going to go out and protest. That, I feel like that's a more direct form of change, right? So it's, I don't want to use the word, but you're trying to, like, how do you make it appealing, right? How do you make it as exciting as, going out and protesting is getting involved in, like, reforming the process the way you all are working on open primaries right now?
So one way that you can make it more appealing to younger voters is try and form it in a way that they can understand. So one way that we marketed open primaries is, instead of saying how the process works out, say how the process affects you right now. So we use arguments like, if you're an independent voter in Florida, you're shut out of the elections, that being the primary elections. When people hear that, they're like, whoa, what are they talking about? I want to learn more. So when you use something that a young person can relate to, or a young person can easily get their attention towards, them by themselves will go and learn more on their own expedition of knowledge. So it's primarily about getting them focused on the issue rather than trying to educate them on the issue firsthand. I think Elena can add on more to that.
Yeah, more specifically about, like, content. One of my pride and joy, at least, is on our social media, we would post memes, because why not? Memes are awesome. Memes are fun, but we'd also, like, make the memes about open primaries, and we'd make the memes about Amendment 3 and the amendment that we were pushing for and the reforms that we were pushing for. And I think that, like Dariel was saying, sort of communicating on in the ways that students and young people and in the avenues that they're already plugged into is a great place to start. And I also think just, like, passion. When you're passionate about something, it really shows, and it really draws people in. It's a magnet. for an audience, which is why I think that when we see protests and the passion that they have, that's why they get so big, is because when you see one person or one group of people very passionate about an issue, it makes you want to sit and listen to them, and it makes you want to pay attention and maybe learn more about this thing. Because if these people are so excited and so passionate about reforming the system, then maybe you should be too. And as for the whole sort of uncomfortable by politics type of feeling that a lot of people have, as you can probably tell, that couldn't be me. But I think that it comes with, you know, good education about what's going on in our political system, which is, once again, something we're trying to do at Students for Open Primaries. We're going to have an education session where we talk about our primary system, about the closed primary system, the open primary systems that we have, and the semi-open primary systems that we have, to better inform young people by having discussions, you know, face-to-face with them, sort of like we're doing right now. And yeah, I mean, it also helps when you get people like Magic Johnson to endorse people that like people might know, which that was a reference to our campaign. But I'd say top three things, you know, be passionate, get into the avenues that people are already plugged into, and find ways that you can bring other people in, whether they be celebrities or maybe there's someone in the younger community or in this community that might appeal to these people who are sort of on the edge of getting into politics, that could convince them otherwise.
Yeah. And I really want to double down on that point, because I think you mentioned this also briefly, Elena, that one of the things that we saw, and I think this is what you were asking, Zach, in terms of like, how do you make political reform interesting, right? What we did see is that the young vote, if you look at voting as a form of political participation, it actually increased after the March for Our Lives movement, right? And the theory I had going into this film is that because of Black Lives Matter and the movement last year, we were also going to see an increase, because I think young people are they're now making the connection that, you know, the people who are responsible for the lack of gun control, these people are in public office. You have to vote them out, right? So I think that there is a connection that's starting to be made more and more, and it's being driven by young people, right? That they're saying, no, we have to get involved in if you care about climate change, if you care about gun control, if you care about Black Lives Matter, you actually have to do this. So I think that's exactly what Elena is saying here. We're going to take a few more questions. I see that we have Christy Cooper in Montana. Is that right? Are you there, Christy? We may have lost Christy. And then we also, sorry?
I'm here.
Okay, go ahead, Christy.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm really, we're starting an impact campaign that's going to be focused on working with young people, the younger generations, on government accountability. And we're just kind of trying to figure out like what's the best way to communicate with the younger generations. And I'm not talking about social media. I'm not talking about posting and like, you know, creating awareness around events and stuff, but I'm talking about actually engaging and having conversations, because we're finding emails are really difficult and we're not getting responses yes, I just would love to know, like, how are young people communicating today? How do they want to communicate? What's the best way to kind of create those conversations? Yeah.
Maybe we'll start with Gary, actually, since Gary runs an organization that's focused on, you know, cultivating the leadership of young people, and then maybe we'll hear from one other panelist. Go ahead, Gary.
I think that the best way to communicate to young people is, or just relate to them, is to make sure you really understand, really make sure that you show that you care about them.
Set her out in the freezer, put it on the chili. I didn't see any.
If everyone else could mute, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Gary.
So I think, you know, it's not a quick thing, right? But to be able to first show that you really care about the well-being of the young person, and their kind of holistic development. That's what's worked so far for us. It's important to really not get into the mind frame of like, you know, we can get young people to do something. I think that's where that's the sort of the instrumental sort of mindset that really turns off young people. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a start.
Yeah, it's a great response. One of the things we saw with one of the organizers we followed is she was much more effective at doing outreach to young people as a young person to get them to vote than someone who is, say, my age. So that's another thing, right? Is just to think about who's doing the outreach.
To add on to what
Dariel, do you want to add something?
Yeah, to add on to what Diane was saying, Civics Unplugged actually has a few of their own discussion-based series, the Trek, and then another series where it's a Zoom call, essentially full of young people, and they pick a topic and they discuss it for about an hour. I've participated in some of them. They were really engaging. And I believe, as Diane said, young person to young person is much more of an effective communication than, say, an adult to a high schooler. So when you put a bunch of young people in one room and you give them a prompt or you give them a starting question, I feel like young people, being the leaders that they are, they'll lead that direction into the right path, and you can just watch and hear what they have to say and implement what they have to say back into your own organization's messaging.
Great.
Can I piggyback off of this?
Yes, please.
I am kind of new to this. I'm just starting to get involved in organizing with independent voting, and the biggest thing that I think it's important to remember is just how much young people are doing. In talking to some of the people that we're organizing with, I start to remember like, oh, they've got midterms and they've got, you know, stuff going on with school and they're involved in this organization at school and this and that. And sometimes I tend to be like, oh, wow, I've been out of college for a couple of years. I totally forgot just how much pressure that is and how much they've got going on. And what I've found that works the best is a lot of these younger people are already kind of active and engaged. And it's a lot of kind of leaving the door open for them. You know, I try to reach out. I do a mix of like emails and calling and, you know, try not to be spammy, but keeping it open, keeping the door open, keep letting them know it's there, and just being understanding of their situation, knowing I know you're a student, I know you've got a lot going on. If you, you know, feel comfortable and you have the time, we are doing this thing if you want to get involved, kind of a thing.
Yeah, just to add on real quick, to like this sort of whole discussion about cultivating discussion between generations and student-led organizations and involving students in political organizations. I think that Civics Unplugged does something really, really awesome, which Julie kind of touched on, but it's sort of this opt-in culture that they've created at Civics Unplugged, sort of like Julie was saying. When you can contribute and when you want to, come, and that makes it seem so much more inviting, especially like I'm a full-time student in high school right now. I've got about 4 assignments due tomorrow that are, you know, weighing on my mind right now, and I have to juggle that plus all of my other responsibilities, and sometimes you know, it's hard. We're all very busy students, and like Gary's saying, just building that trust and building that understanding and flexibility means the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I filmed Dariel one day. He was planning, I think it was like your homecoming dance, for like, that was your actual school activity. And then when he was done with that, he started calling voters for open primary. And I'm like, something is not right here. That he's like planning a dance, right? And that's actually schoolwork. And, you know, the work of like organizing people to turn out for open primaries was not considered schoolwork.
There's a big divide between what happens at school and what happens in the real world. It no longer prepares you for the real life. It just prepares you to sit down and I guess plan dances for a living.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember on the night of the election, I had econ homework due, so I was sitting there watching the polls and like filming myself on one end for the documentary, and I was like doing my homework. Yeah, I had to juggle like 5 things that night. It was crazy.
No, and I bring that up because I just think that there's an opportunity. I think this generation is more than prepared to do this work, right? And it's interesting to me that you all are doing it as your side hustles. So let's take one more question actually before we wrap up. We might have time for 2. I think Adam in Pittsburgh, are you there still? We may not have Adam anymore. And then lastly, we have Evan in Illinois who had a question about student ambassadors.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am an 18-year-old ranked choice voting activist from Illinois. It's great to meet you all. Now about open primaries, I went on your webpage and I saw that California, Alaska, Washington, Nebraska have an amazing example of what open primaries should be. And if that was the model for the rest of the country, then we would be superb. So I was curious to know, do you have any contacts in those states? And can we get their help to draft legislation for other states like Illinois?
So with the student ambassador program that we're working on developing, obviously our initial focus is getting student ambassadors in closed primary states, but I also mentioned that we would like to have one in every single state. And what we're imagining for these already open primary state student ambassadors is helping one, organize voters in a certain region, say the Midwest, say the Northeast, help get primaries open in that region, as well as just overall organizing students, because that's a challenge. And we'd love to expand into like regional chapters as well as state chapters and target open primary activism and reform that way. But to make a very long story short, yes, we would love to have students from open primary states working as student ambassadors to help push open primary reforms in closed primary states or semi-open primary states.
And what should they do, Elena? Should they go on your website or reach out to you?
I'll actually go and paste our website right now in the chat.
Thank you, Dariel. Yeah, we have a whole get involved section. Feel free to email our email, which is info@studentsforop.org, I believe, but it's also on the website. And there's also a form on the website if you're interested in filling that out. But as Dariel said, he's going to paste it in the chat.
Right now, we're still building our communication section of Students For Open Primaries as to how we connect with each other as a community. But if you fill out that form that I just sent in the chat as a young person, you should get updates in your inbox, your email inbox, until we get set up on a centralized communications source. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I do have one more question if you have the time. I'm sorry.
Oh, if you can make it super quick, because then we're going to wrap up and tell you how to like stay in touch with everybody.
It is. Open primaries is a great way to expand democracy, but it's clearly not the only one. What other policy initiatives do you plan to work with? Could it be voting? Could it be campaign finance? Like, what else do you support?
So Students for Open Primaries is obviously focused on open primaries primarily, but our mission is to educate people on all types of democracy reform initiatives, whether it be ranked choice voting or campaign finance reform. I can't really say any specific initiative right now, but if an initiative supports democracy and it helps our democracy get better, that's something that we would absolutely support as a human being and as an organization.
And to sort of jump off that, as long as they're ready and willing to help open the primaries with us, I mean, I don't see why not. For instance, I believe it was in Missouri, they had not only open primaries, but approval voting. And Open Primaries as a whole was very supportive of that initiative because, you know, you're right, sometimes open primaries is not enough. And working with other campaigns can, you know, let more of our electorate vote in elections. And that's really what we're all about.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for participating. Thank you to Dariel and Elena and Julia and Gary, and of course, Open Primaries for hosting this. I personally am super inspired, having spent the better part of 2020. Thank goodness I had these young people to follow around for a year by their just engagement and participation in our democracy. And whether it's the rise of independent voters, open primaries, looking at making voting more accessible to all voters, or looking at our civics education in our schools. I think there are a lot of different interventions out there that we can take to make sure that we're engaging more and more young people in our democracy. So thank you to everyone who joined. Please follow Open Primaries and Students for Open Primaries, and look out for the Young Vote, which will be coming to you before the midterms very soon. And I think that's it. Russell, do you want to close out?
Yes. Yes, thank you so much to Diane. Thank you for hosting today. And thank you for everyone on the panel for participating. I just wanted a quick note, we will be sending you a follow-up email tomorrow with the link of this recording, this conversation. Please help share it far and wide. This is just the beginning. And we really want to find students and young people in all 50 states who are committed to breaking out of politics as usual and to truly working for reform from the bottom up. So please reach out if you are have any questions on that. Also, remember to reach out to me if you are inspired by this call and interested in joining our Open Primaries Education Fund, Students for Open Primaries 2021 Youth Initiative Fundraising Committee. We need every bit of support possible to make that happen. If you're not interested in joining the committee, but can make a tax-deductible donation, that's great. Maybe even better, depending on how large the donation is. So I left the link to donate in the chat. Thank you so much for everyone for participating. We will keep talking, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much.